everyone, to another edition of the Global Conversations webcast, where we engage in meaningful discussions on global systems, institutional changes, and how each one of us can foster a better tomorrow. My name is Andre Darmanin, your host of this insightful series. In today's episode, I'm privileged to have Shakil Chaudhry as my guest. He's a renowned author of Deep Diversity, a compassionate scientific approach to achieving racial justice. He's also a diversity consultant and one of the founding partners of Anima Leadership, along with Anahid Dashgard. Shakil has dedicated his professional life to unraveling the complexities of EDI with a knack for simplifying intricate issues. Shakil effectively reframes societal conversations around these critical components of our intertwining lives. His monumental work with Anima promotes systemic change, pushing beyond the surface level discourse around EDI to expose the deep-seated connected systems that require attention. Shakil emphasizes literacy as a foundational stepping stone towards achieving true equity and diversity. Today, we're fortunate to have Shakil's expertise guide in redefining and rethinking the pivotal constructs of equity, diversity, and inclusion. We aim to delve into the compelling intersections of socio-political landscapes and its progressive theories of EDI, all with the goal of fostering a comprehensive understanding of these crucial issues and challenging us to reassess our roles within this expansive spectrum. Join us as we traverse this enlightening journey with Shakil, steering the conversation towards a socially conscious landscape where equity, inclusion, and belonging aren't mere ideals, but collectively pursued realities. Welcome, Shakil.
Thanks so much, Andre, for having me here.
Thanks. So before we begin, as I was traversing or perusing through your LinkedIn profile, one of the things I noticed was that you're an MES grad. So, and the funny thing is how I started my career was that I've been immersed in urban planning. So I guess with your self-introduction, tell us your journey as to being from, going from grad school and master. So MES, I should mention, that's the Masters of Environmental Studies program at York University in Toronto. And a lot of urban planners and environmentalists graduate through that program. So tell us how that journey started and how you got into this work.
So, MES, where I started is as a professional teacher, but my real area of interest was environmental education. So that's how I first got politicized, was through environmental issues. And so I was an outdoor educator, and when I went to do higher education, the best program that I could find that had the most flexibility was the environmental studies program. And what was amazing about that program was it's very broad. And although I showed up with the very stereotypical understanding of environment as what is green and save the earth, they had a really broad focus of environment being everything that affects your lived experience. And it was there that actually my political awakening happened around anti-racism, because of some of the profs there that were teaching things that I could barely understand. I was like, I don't know exactly what they're saying, but it is so compelling. Yeah. And it keeps like pulling me. And afterwards I would realize that, these profs that were most influential for me at that time were speaking using a anti-racist perspective, using a feminist perspective, using a post-colonial perspective, things that I had no idea about, but just every time they spoke, I was like, oh my God, that's so powerful. It actually helps me understand something, even though the language was not that accessible, but it just compelled me to go there. And I ended up dropping my entire focus on green environmentalism and moving into racial justice and equity work. And that's where I've continued to today.
Yeah, no, that's an interesting story of, as I continuously say on this webcast, is that everyone's journey is totally different into this work. There's some influence somewhere, but at the end of the day, this is the direction that people go into. And yeah, so so now, what is something that people don't know about you normally?
Uh, that that I'm an athlete
Mm-hmm.
that has started a number of things, continued to learn new sports in my middle age. At age 40, I started playing ultimate frisbee. I started running and did both a half marathon as well as started trail running. I started surfing,
Hmm.
and that's a new adventure. I even took up boxing for a bit.
Oh yeah.
So those are things that I feel like, even though I'm, well into my 50s, I still like to learn things, and I especially like to learn things as it relates to being physical and active, and that's a part that I have a lot of gratitude for, that I can do those things.
Yeah. And the learning part is one thing, but also too, in terms of self-care, right? This is what it is, right? You're mixing those two, especially in this work. This is something that we pride ourselves on, but we don't do enough of it. And it's good that you've done this. I mean, for me, it's, during the pandemic, I took up running myself, and it was just, it was just amazing, just to have that freedom to just, go anywhere. You're not tied to a route. You're not tied, outside of the occasional, crosswalk and other things. But yeah, I mean, that's the thing. It's, and now you're doing these other activities, which is amazing, right? And these are things that we need to, we need to have those conversations about, in terms of, like I said, of self-care and trying new things, and just having the freedom to do that, right? So definitely. And so, one of the things, as I was also perusing through your profile, and I got to see some of your posts and whatnot on LinkedIn, you know, there are concepts you've mentioned in hashtags, like hashtag redefining DEI, or redefining it, or even now you have our EDI, or sorry, I should say DEI, as harm reduction. So in your concept, in terms of what you've been talking about specifically, we talk about harm reduction is one thing. We talk about redefining EDI, especially in the concept, in the world that we live in. So can you elaborate on why you went down that direction, and what those are really all about?
So I've been involved in racial justice and equity work for almost 30 years now. And I think about it like this. In that time, I've had a front row seat to the things that have gone really well in my field and the things that have gone badly.
Mm-hmm.
And, there's a way that, especially if you're doing justice work, there's such an urgency to do
Mm-hmm.
the work, because we know that minoritized groups, especially, are being undertreated, they're being over surveilled, they're being over policed. And so there's an urgency, because bad things are basically happening, whether you're looking at in education, whether you're looking at healthcare, in the workplace. So this is the whole reason for equity, diversity, inclusion, for racial justice. It's because there are problems we're trying to fix. Now, that urgency is the driver. It's a big feeling that is driving the work.
Mm-hmm.
And it makes our work really, morally, we're on the high ground, because we're trying to fix things for ourselves. We're trying to fix things for a world that's unjust. So we got the moral high ground.
Yeah.
However, that does not necessarily translate to us being effective. So, for example, in 2023, this year,
Mm-hmm.
affirmative action legislation in the United States was defeated. Okay, so Supreme Court struck it down. That's about 70 years since civil rights legislation passed. Now, those of us who are progressives, we're frustrated and enraged that has happened. Not just because it's happening in the US, but because that is a harbinger of things that are happening politically everywhere. DEI is under attack because, well, for a lot of reasons that are obvious. I mean, we can blame the forces of white supremacy, which is legit. We can blame Trumpism, which is legit. We can blame 40 years of neoliberal economics, which is legit. All those are important meta factors that have created the conditions where something like affirmative action gets defeated, Roe versus Wade gets defeated. These are big things. Now, however, we also have to look at the fact that what's been our role and our contributing factors in the polarization. Because the truth is that we have pushed away not just conservatives, but we've pushed away liberals in this process. And so progressives, anti-racists, people doing this work around racial justice and equity, we have to also be willing to look at ourselves and say, what can we do better? And the truth is that a lot of our message failed. And it's failed because our message was highly academic, it was inaccessible, it was filled with shame and blame, and those things push people away. So people that naturally should come to us are moving further away. Why? Because of the fact that we've created conditions which have been exacerbated by social media in which like purity politics is the defining feature of everything. We're almost going towards the aspect of racial essentialism, where it's like your identity is the only thing about you that matters. It's like, well, my identity is more than my race. I'm more than my gender. I'm more than my sexual orientation and disabilities and so on. I mean, we are those things, but we're also more than those things. But we're getting trapped in these boxes. And guess what? Whether it's boardroom tables or kitchen tables, people are really pushing back in these things. And some of us have to be able to say, wait a minute, we can do this better. But that means the willingness to take a look at the stuff that's really working well, because there are really important concepts and really important successes that we have made in bringing forward conversations around privilege into this space, bringing forward conversations around systemic discrimination. I mean, defunding the police, which was a real peripheral concept for a lot of people, has come into the public consciousness. I mean, these are important things that we've done. There are people that are on board that weren't on board before. At the same time, we're also pushing people away.
Yeah.
And at a time where democracy is hanging by a thread in the US and in many places, authoritarianism is rising. We need more people on the side of justice, not less. And that means progressives, we have to be willing to look at ourselves. So what I've been talking about is I've been taking the ideas because I'm an educator, and I'm really talking about DEI from an education perspective. And so I'm saying, well, I think there's things we can do better. So let's rethink DEI. Let's also differentiate really what's translating to ideological DEI from what I'm referring to as more relational, more pragmatic DEI.
Yeah.
And I think that I'm trying to stimulate that conversation because it just needs to happen. Yeah. And there are people that are working in this area and have been working in this area, but we've been very disparate.
Yeah.
We've been Loretta Ross is doing like calling in culture over there, and I'm doing deep diversity over here, and there's bits and pieces, conversations that are happening, but there's a lot of us that think we can do this differently, and meaning still to achieve justice goals, but we need to show up in a different way.
Yeah. And you've raised some good points, and I tend to think of the people who are who think that we can't have these conversations anymore about DI. You have the Bari Weisses in the US and the Glenn Loweries who are thinking it from a different perspective. So being pragmatic is one thing, but then there's people who are just like, DEI is the problem, right? So how would you respond to people like that who say that, or who, I believe people like John McWhorter and Glenn Lowry are they're for it, but they're probably in the same camp as what you are. But then you have those, the people like Abari Weiss, for instance, who are like, we need to calm things down and say things differently. What would you say to those people?
Well, here's what I'd say. First of all, I'm actually not that interested in the loud extremist voices.
Right.
Right? Like, I'm just not.
Mm-hmm.
They're not my area of focus.
Yeah.
I'm not into that kind of debate. It's like, go yell at the wind all you want. Like, the justice work is going to continue.
Mm-hmm.
It's going to continue because justice work has always happened, in spite of all the voices against justice work. So I'm really not interested in those people that think DEI or talking about justice is the problem, right?
Yeah.
Like, people are saying that. I'm like, okay, you're either bad actors, you're trolls, or you just don't understand. And there'll be some people who want to work with you, but I'm not that. I want to talk to the majority.
Right.
And my experience is that I've worked in the U.S., I've worked in Canada, I've worked in purple states, I've worked in red states. I've been in places where what I generally find is that people aren't opposed to doing the right thing. We just don't know what the right thing always is. My feeling is that my experience has been that most people want to know what the right thing is. They just don't want to be told they're jerks. They don't want to be told they're part of the bad group. They don't want to be told that everything about them and their identity they have to apologize for. And those are things that we can change.
Yeah.
Right? Like, I work in a number of purple states where, like Wisconsin, Michigan, places like that. And in those places, in any group I'm speaking to, whether it's an executive team, whether it's middle managers, like, I'm in a room of mixed politics, of Republicans, of Democrats, of independents, of like all these folks, right? So when I'm there, the conversations that are happening, what are actually really thoughtful conversations. People are wanting to be in these conversations. They find them hard. So we have to help them through that, because they are damn hard. They're emotional. They touch at our very core. And this is part of the problem, is that we don't, in our work, we're so focused on the urgency that we forget how to teach. And that's a big focus for me is, we really have to focus on the education, which is different than the direct action strategies might be used on the streets. The problem is that in justice work, we take the direct action strategies on the street and put them into the classroom as though that's somehow supposed to make people learn better, which is just garbage. I mean, I'm trained as a middle school teacher, and for many years, I even did the very things that today I'm like, I would never do that. But I taught justice the way that I had been taught anti-racism, which is to use academic terms, which is to, if you get resistance, to out-talk, shut down, challenge in ways that aren't helpful as a learner. Now, these might be the strategies you use on the street. These strategies you might, if you're protesting police violence and, trying to bring accountability to government agencies that aren't doing what they're supposed to be doing for marginalized groups, but you can't bring those strategies in the classroom. And yet that is what's happened, because we have overly academic, overly heady, non-learning elements brought in. And I think that's a big part of the problem. So what I'm really advocating for is that when I'm talking about rethink DEI, I'm saying let's recenter the learner in this process, because just because you're a person of color doesn't mean you see all the patterns around racism. Just because you're a woman doesn't mean you see all the patterns around sexism. These aren't inherent, like, systems, things you can see. Now, you might be more likely to understand the patterns of sexism if you're a woman, because you might have received more sexist and misogynistic behavior, so you get it. You might understand racist patterns more easily if you're a person of color or indigenous, because you might have experienced them, and that conversations might be more alive in your community. But that's not just automatically true. And so I step in as a teacher, and I'm like, okay, whether you're white or BIPOC, racialized, racial minority, whatever it might be, I mean, I'm going to show up helping you learn. That's what
Mm-hmm.
I'm supposed to do. And I'm going to show up with vulnerability. I'm not going to tell you about your mistakes. I'm going to start by telling you about my mistakes. So you realize this is part of the human condition, that
Mm-hmm.
this is part of just learning.
Yeah.
And we don't have as much focus on learning. We just have a focus on knowing. You must
Yeah.
know. Either you know or you don't know. And if you don't know, you're bad. And I just
Yeah.
think that subtext, which goes through a lot of the training and education, I think is terrible.
Yeah.
And I think we need to start talking about that's part of the reason that our message failed. Now, I'm not talking about all the political negative forces at play that are anti-DEI. Those anti-DEI forces have always been there.
Yeah.
But like, we can do our things better. We can reach out to the middle better.
Yeah. Yeah. And this is something I even spoke about in a previous podcast or webcast episode of Rachel DeCoste, who when we talked about the activism versus pragmatism, and you speak basically the same language in that, we need to be more pragmatic and realistic in this work. And you mentioned even, and I think you've alluded to this, is that the EDI literacy concept, right? And making sure that we don't, so much talk about it from the perspective of the academia taking over for the most part of what's being done, but it's more about how do we become pragmatic and, like you say, bring people together in all this. Yeah. So let me shift gears for a moment to, more recent events here. So as we all know, at the time of this recording, we have the Israel-Palestine conflict. And, this is a global issue, but also it's a local issue, right? And so I guess, how can we apply the principles of, equity and inclusivity from how we communicate amongst ourselves, or how, and even in our workplaces, because I was hearing about a story where, people are becoming chastised for supporting one group or another, especially towards the Palestinian people. But how do you promote that, in your view, in such trouble, promote peace in using this work that we do?
Well, this is a really complicated um, question, and I'll do my best to try to answer it
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
succinctly. And all I can promise is that I can offer some entry points at this point, because I think
Yeah.
this would be like a multi-hour conversation to get
Yeah.
at the heart of this thing.
Yeah.
What I would say is, first of all, um, there's a few principles that we should really use that can help us. Okay. Um, First is uh, to know the difference between being neutral and being non-polarized.
Mm-hmm.
Some people think that in this I can just be neutral. Well, we know that neutrality basically supports the power dynamic as it is. It
Mm-hmm.
supports the oppressor. So to be neutral in a conflict basically means I'm just giving my space up to oppression, those that are dominating. Being non-polarized is a different thing. Being
Mm-hmm.
non-polarized is to be able to see the patterns, around power,
Mm-hmm.
who has resources, who has power, who has military might, who has these kind of things. What's the historical context within which this is happening? And then to be able to hold, like right now, what we need is a shit ton of people that can help hold these conversations. Because here's the reality, here's what happens psychologically with conflict, is that conflict, by its very nature, um, forces us to choose a side.
Mm-hmm.
But if all of us choose a side, then who looks after the whole?
Mm-hmm.
And so this is the difference between being neutral and being non-polarized.
Mm-hmm.
I can have an opinion. I can be on the side of justice, and I can help hold these conversations. So,
Mm-hmm.
in holding these conversations, what I think about is this. Um, I did a piece on LinkedIn, and when this conflict started, I said, okay, look, there were student groups from Harvard that got a lot of negative press.
Yeah.
Why? Because right away, they went to this place that said, you know, everything that's just happened, this the 1,200 people that got murdered by Hamas, that the 200 people that are still being held hostage even today, that basically all of that is Israel's fault.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, now that is dehumanization in action.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, the reality is that Hamas basically murdered civilians.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, that's a war crime. They didn't go after soldiers, they went after civilians. That's a war crime. You have to denounce the war crime.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, if you do not denounce the war crime, you're already polarized. Okay, now the second thing is that in this context, the people that got attacked directly in this moment were Israelis.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, um, uh, anti-Semitism is alive and well in our world today. Israel is there because of the Holocaust and 6 million Jewish people being murdered.
Mm-hmm.
We have to contextualize that. Okay, we have to recognize that there's a trauma here within a group of people, and for good reasons. There's fear. Okay, now that's one pole. Can I hold it? Can I see it? And even for the people who are listening, how are you feeling even as I say this? Are you getting activated? Are you want to challenge? Are you upset? Just notice what's happening for you even as I speak, because that's information for you about you and about your polarization. On the other hand, let's also look at what's happening, which is the reality is that uh, the we have Palestinians living in a situation which is for the last 70 years, um, and Gaza, which is described by Amnesty International and other human rights groups as literally an open air prisons.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, because electricity, oil, gas, supplies, all are controlled by Israel. So the amount of
Mm-hmm.
humiliation that happens on a daily basis, the violence that happens at the hands of the Israeli government, Israeli soldiers. I mean, we're talking about. I mean, there's been war crimes happening before. Now,
Yeah.
Israel and war crimes committed by Israel. To be clear, now Israel then retaliates. You
Mm-hmm.
have 2 million people living in Gaza, a city the size of Toronto, the size of Seattle, the size of Detroit.
Mm-hmm.
2 million people who are now civilians are being bombarded. In the first few days, it was like 6,000 bombs got dropped on a city the size of the city you and I live in, right?
Mm-hmm.
And that was just in the first few days. White phosphorus. This is like illegal stuff. Should not be. There's things that are happening. Israel responds with war crimes. What is happening today with 1 million people being marched into the south and now being pushed towards the Egyptian border? That's by definition ethnic cleansing, right?
Mm-hmm.
So can we
Mm-hmm.
hold space for that as well?
Mm-hmm.
Now, in this dynamic, we have to keep recognizing that every time something happens, anti-Semitism massively jacks up in Canada and the US, making Jewish people feel scared.
Mm-hmm.
Are we able to stand up with our Jewish brothers and sisters and say no to anti-Semitism, or are we collapsing going, yeah, but Israel?
Yeah.
Because
Right.
can we differentiate Jewish people from the Israeli government, which is
Mm-hmm.
the hardest, most far-right government that's emerged in that context,
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
right? So like, can we differentiate them? So can we go back and forth between these realities? Can we hear the fact that Jewish progressives are feeling under attack by their by their progressive peers who seem to be completely discounting everything around anti-Semitism.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, can we also see simultaneously that anti-Arab, anti-Muslim, anti-Palestinian bias has been baked in to our government's responses
Mm-hmm.
since the state of Israel being formed?
Yeah.
Right? That
Yeah.
there's a pro-Israeli stance, like basically, the Globe and Mail, our national paper in Canada, the New York Times. As soon as the Hamas, the murderous attack that happened by Hamas happened, they basically the editorials basically gave full license for Israel to defend itself
Yeah.
and to do whatever it needed to uproot Hamas, and that all collateral damage, including civilians, was going to be okay. That's called Islamo-racism.
Yeah.
That's called anti-Palestinian racism.
Yeah.
Can you hold space for that? Can we hold space for all of these very complicated things? And can we notice ourselves in terms of which side we go towards? But also, can we not get into this, well, one side versus the other, because there is a power dynamic.
Mm-hmm.
And the power dynamic is one that the fourth most powerful military in the world is Israel.
Yep.
We're dealing with 2 million people in Gaza that are basically unarmed civilians that are being bombed.
Mm-hmm.
And yes, the hunt for terrorists is in there, looking for Hamas. But you can't wipe out, like, one tragedy of 1,400 people being murdered and 200 people being imprisoned, taken for hostage. We can't just take that and go, therefore, that gives clear runway for ethnic cleansing. Like, we just can't.
Yeah.
Like, that's not okay. It's like, absolutely. And here's the thing. Democracies, we have to be really careful when we're in a democracy.
Mm-hmm.
Israel's a democracy. It's a powerful democracy. But when democracies retaliate with vengeance, when democracies retaliate with violence, they become like the terrorists they're pursuing.
Yep. Yeah, definitely.
And that feeds the cycle of distrust. It feeds a cycle of bitterness. It feeds a cycle of vengeance. It feeds a cycle of authoritarianism.
Yeah.
And it creates problems that we can't even see. And in fact, it will make things more unsafe, I'm sure, for Israelis, for Palestinians, for Jewish people outside, in living in Canada and the US and Europe. It's going to make things, it makes things difficult for Palestinian and Arab people and Muslim people in all these places.
Mm-hmm.
Right? So all this happens simultaneously. So can we hold these tensions?
Yeah.
Because lives are lost. There's no way that we can, there's no celebration that should happen when a Jewish life is lost. There should be no celebration when Palestinian lives are lost. Like these are tragic things. Our hearts should be breaking in every side. And while that's happening, we can also see how power works. And power works in a way where the US, Canada, and other Western nations are lining up and have always lined up behind Israel, because Israel holds a very important geostrategic military position in the Middle East, where there's oil and resources, and the fight against Russia and communism and all these different things. There's many things, but there's massive power differentials here, and we can't like, at this point we have to be able to say, oh right, while all these things are happening, we can't get lost and go, wait a minute, not lose track of the fact that there's 2 million people right now that are not only being displaced, but under attack. That ceasefire has to happen. Yeah. Absolutely. Bring the hostages home that is held by Hamas, but you can't do it like this. And we've seen this from 9/11. We've seen that attacking Iraq, attacking Afghanistan. Well, 20 years later, we've got a totally destabilized Middle East region. We had ISIS and its horrific attacks, which was worse than Al Qaeda. And guess what? In Afghanistan, for sure, Osama bin Laden's gone, but guess what? The Taliban are still in charge. In fact, more
Exactly.
powerful than they were.
Yep.
So the billions and trillions of dollars that went to that war on terror didn't help anything. It might have made people feel a bit better for about the first month if they were Americans or on the side of the war, on the side of vengeance, should I say? But vengeance doesn't help. And right now, I'm worried about what's going to happen in that region, because there's vengeance and then there's consequences, some that we can predict, some that we can't. And I'm just worried about that. And so non-polarized means holding all of these tensions so we can have a conversation.
Exactly. And no, you've made some, in the last couple of points, well, not points, but segments, if you will, of this conversation, you've made some really good points for us to think about. And so, as I close with this conversation, what would be some of your thoughts or some key takeaways, given the current dynamics that we're in locally, internationally, and globally? What are some key takeaways for that you think we should have for the last month and a bit of 2023, 2024, and beyond, for equity practitioners and leaders, I would say? Give me like two or three.
One thing that I think about is that one, we have to realize this is just really emotional. It's not a cognitive problem we're trying to fix. There's no shortage of thoughts and solutions that are cognitive. Most of these problems are emotional. Most of these problems are at the level of the unconscious, at the reaction level. So start by acknowledging that it's emotions, and you're not going to help someone work through their emotions by giving them facts. So one of the things you have to develop, leaders have to develop, DEI professionals need to develop, is emotional literacy. And emotional literacy meaning start with your own emotions and developing your own capacity for emotions, your own emotions of other people. So emotional literacy is so important as it is on all times, actually, because humans are emotional creatures first, we're thinking creatures second, as much as we like to believe it's the opposite. The second thing is to develop skills and perspectives around power and learning to hold tensions. So power, history, and learning to hold the multiple tensions is really, really important at this time. And those are skills. Those are great conversation skills. Those are facilitation skills. Those are leadership skills. And the third thing I'd say is learning to be in relationship when it's hard. Learning to be in relationship with each other, not because I expect from you, Andre, to be perfect, that I expect you to have all the right answers. In fact, it's learning to live with the imperfect answers that come out of us, come out of each other, and can we still be in conversation and dialogue and relationship so we can move to better ways of understanding each other. And that requires a lot of work. And so inner work is the start and inner work is the end of this, to be able to do the hard work of holding ourselves in relationship, holding our communities together, holding and helping build bridges through wounds.
Great points, and great for our those who are watching and those who are listening to take heed and to think about it, especially given our state of the world as we speak, and the state of the profession and the work that we do. So this was an excellent very deep, to for a lack of a better term, with your deep diversity book. This is a deep conversation that I truly believe a lot of people will take in and hopefully be able to apply and with their work in and itself. So I just want to end with a couple of last things. First, kind of a little fun thing that I like to do. What is the one song at this moment inspires you, whether it's personal or part of your work, and that defines who you are?
Oh my God.
Other than Fight the Power with your Public Enemy shirt there.
Right now, I think you've picked up something right away, which is I'll go with Public Enemy right now, because that's a shirt I'm wearing, but also that's the era that I also grew up in, which is the golden age of hip hop and also really conscious rap, and I'd say Fight the Power is a great song right now that feels alive in the moment. And I'm sure there's a handful of other ones too that I could, but they're not at the top of my mind right now.
Well, you kind of gave it away with the shirt, so I mean, I might as well have picked up on it, right? So, and I guess that concludes our discussion. And for our listeners and those who are watching, how can people connect with you and learn more about your work, and how best can they reach you on social media?
So at Shakil Writes, SHAKILWRITES. Also, my organization is Anima Leadership, ANIMA leadership.com. And those are great ways to connect with me, and also check out my profile on LinkedIn.
All right. Well, thank you again for this amazing conversation. I really, really appreciate it. And Shakil, thank you for being a guest today. I'm grateful for our conversation, and looking forward to continuing the conversation as always, with your work and whatnot. So with that, this concludes another episode of Global Conversations webcast. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and comment on YouTube or on your favorite podcast channels. With that, I bid you adieu. Thanks again.